important issue, a critical issue that affects the security of our country and the security of our families. When the subcommittee first began planning this hearing, of course, we didn't know it would fall just 3 weeks after the most deadly terrorist attack on American soil since September 11th. The evil terrorist attack in Orlando last month that targeted the LGBT community was yet another reminder of the urgent need to re-examine and to redouble our government's efforts to combat violent Islamic jihadism, both at home and abroad, and particularly to disrupt and ultimately destroy the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. There's no room for complacency on this issue. It warrants continuous scrutiny and oversight from Congress as our government's understanding of the enemy evolves, and we'll hear some about that today. ISIS, of course, specializes in savagery, violence inspired by delusions of sectarian conquest from another age, yet it has effectively deployed modern technology of the information age to spread its propaganda and recruit killers to its cause. ISIS has developed a sophisticated information warfare capability. It has pioneered a distinctive strategy of targeted online recruitment while disseminating sleek viral videos and messages, primarily from two media centers, Al Hayat and Al Furqan, through a constantly evolving set of online platforms. As FBI Director James Comey has noted, even if we were able to keep foreign terrorists physically out of the United States, online communication and social media allow ISIS to, as he said, quote, enter as a photon and radicalize somebody in Wichita, Kansas, end quote. ISIS has weaponized online propaganda in a new and very lethal way. The damage wrought by that weapon is considerable. Orlando, 49 dead. San Bernardino, 14. Fort Hood, 13 dead. The Boston Marathon, 3 dead, hundreds wounded. Each of these killers was reportedly radicalized to some degree by online jihadist content. And so many other attacks inspired by means of social media have, thank God, been thwarted. Indeed, experts tell us that throughout last year, social media played some part in the radicalization of all of the 60 people arrested in the United States for criminal acts in support of ISIS. Again, we may hear more about that today. Most recently, of course, the FBI has publicly stated that it is highly confident that the Orlando killer, Omar Mateen, was radicalized, at least in part, through the Internet. One longstanding aim of ISIS propaganda machine is to attract foreign fighters to ISIS-controlled territory. Often ISIS tells its recruits tales of high adventure, joined with false narratives of Islamic extremism as a utopia. The bizarre images behind me, over here, for example, appear in ISIS film, exhorting Muslims around the world to join the Islamic State, rather than show ISIS fighters for what they are, murderers of innocent victims who are themselves overwhelmingly Muslim. They are shown here playing with laughing children and shopping in local marketplaces. Appeals like these have helped draw an estimated 30,000 foreign fighters, including at least 6,000 Westerners, to take up arms with ISIS. The good news is that the Defense Department reports a significant decrease in the flow of foreign fighters to ISIS territory. At the same time, however, ISIS has increasingly shifted propaganda efforts to inciting sympathizers to commit acts of terror in the West, including right here in the United States. Online propaganda, amplified by social media and peer-to-peer communication, is now a key weapon in ISIS's arsenal. We should, of course, resist oversimplifying the problem. Not all radicalization in the United States occurs online, and in-person interaction often reinforces the process. But unlike the more common European pattern of jihadist radicalization in clusters, neighborhoods, or in prison, the U.S. threat so far is predominantly that of the lone wolf terrorist, an individual radicalized on his own, often in front of his computer screen with access to online jihadist content and videos that create a sort of virtual training camp. In addition to a clear military strategy and vigilant law enforcement efforts here at home, the United States and our allies need a more robust, coordinated strategy to expose the enemy's lies, counter its false narratives, and encourage credible voices to tell the truth to those most susceptible or receptive to the ISIS lies. And that is true both of foreign and U.S. audiences. Although the ISIS online radicalization threat is well recognized, there is a range of opinion on how best to combat it. And the U.S. government's efforts are still in their early stages, as we'll hear about today. Today, we're going to examine the counter-messaging initiatives that show promise and where the government has fallen short and could accelerate those efforts. In January, the State Department began a revamp of its counterterrorism messaging and coordination efforts with the launch of what's called the Global Engagement Center, a better funded and at least on paper, a more empowered version of its predecessor, the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications. We've had testimony in this room before regarding the Global Engagement Center, and we look forward to getting deeper into that today. Previous efforts to address this threat have struggled to overcome bureaucratic hurdles, unclear authorities, and a lack of interagency communication and a unity of effort. These structural deficiencies will continue to hinder future administrations, both Republican and Democrat, unless they are addressed. That's why I recently introduced legislation with Senator Murphy to help resolve some of these issues and the impact they have on our ability not only to counter propaganda and disinformation from extremist groups like ISIS, but also the equally pressing challenges posed by some nation-states and their sponsored propaganda. The Department of Homeland Security also recently consolidated its counter-violent extremism, or CVE, efforts in a new office called the Office of Community Partnerships. Again, we've heard about this in this hearing room. We look forward to digging deeper today. We'll be hearing more about these efforts, and I'll be interested in exploring whether these initiatives are backed by sufficient authorities and sufficient resources. In addition, social media firms, including Facebook and Twitter, have stepped up their voluntary efforts to police their own terms of service, which prohibit incitements to terrorism. Twitter has closed more than 100,000 ISIS-linked accounts, for instance, and Facebook has actively worked to remove offending users while working in various ways to promote content to counter jihadist propaganda. These actions have helped to degrade ISIS's social media megaphone, according to the Middle East Media Research Institute, but its online presence remains strong. So let's be very clear. To defeat ISIS, it's necessary to destroy the enemy where they live and prosper, in Iraq and in Syria and elsewhere, major cells around the world. Online counter-messaging is no substitute for a clearly defined and vigorously executed military strategy. But a military strategy must be reinforced by a coordinated effort to undermine and disrupt the powerful disinformation spread by Islamic jihadists. Today, we're going to hear from 3 federal agencies involved in that effort, and I appreciate our 3 witnesses before us today. We're also going to hear from some distinguished experts who have been engaged on these issues for many years. With that, I'll turn to my colleague, Senator McCaskill, for her opening statement.